Howdy, everybody. Dr. Andy Woods here. I'm the pastor teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church. Normally, I'm with my good friend, associate pastor, fellow elder, Dr. Jim McGowan. But today, we have a special guest. I'm with Dr. Randall Price. More on him in just a second, but this is Pastor's Point of View number 284. Today is January the 12th, 2024, and I think most people recognize that since October the 7th of last year, with Hamas coming from Gaza attacking Israel, the world has changed, and Israel is now the focus of the conversation. And some of the conversation is good, some of it comes from a framework that is not necessarily rooted and grounded in God's Word, and so we're trying to bring some biblical and historical, archaeological light to the whole controversy. So to help me do this, I'm with my good friend, Dr. Randall Price, who really is a true expert in the Middle East and Israel. Just a little bit from his bio. He is the founder of a ministry called World of the Bible Ministry. He was a distinguished research professor of biblical and Judaic studies at Liberty University from 2007 to 2022. And just a little history on him. After finishing Dallas Theological Seminary, he studied at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, diving deep into the historical, political, geographical context around the Bible. He then spent 20 years involved with archaeological excavations in Israel and Turkey. And according to his website, thus far, Randall has traveled to Israel 110 times. I've actually been on one of his Israel trips, which I highly recommend to you. Most of these trips, he's leading Israel tours, archaeological digs for his ministry entitled World of the Bible Ministries. And so he's going to kind of here today to help us separate fact from fiction, related to tension, related to Israel in the Middle East, and how it fits into God's plan for the end of the age. I've actually prepared, I don't know if we're going to get through all of them, but about 13 or 14 specific questions to ask him. So, Dr. Price, welcome to the broadcast.
Well, thank you, Andy. Let me just add one thing for the credibility of the topic we're talking about. I do have a PhD from the University of Texas in Near Eastern Studies or Middle Eastern Studies. So just so people feel more comfortable with that background than the one from Dallas Seminary.
Yeah.
Just wanted to add that.
Sure. And that's important because we got a lot of these armchair archaeologists today, people claiming to be archaeologists but presenting no academic credentials. So what you're dealing with here with Dr. Price is not just sensationalism. He's the real McCoy. So with all of that being said, and by the way, I borrowed very liberally and generously, with his permission, by the way, of a slideshow presentation that he put together during our current events night at our recent pre-trib meeting in Dallas, December of last year. So if you're looking for his full slide presentation, we can only cover some of his slides. You can access those at the pre-trib website.
Or World of the Bible.
And World of the Bible. worldofthebible.com. And the other website is pre-trib.org. So let's just jump right in here. First question, what is Zionism? It's kind of a compound question, as we call in law, a compound question. Objection, Your Honor, compound question. What is Zionism? Why do you consider yourself a Zionist? And there's biblical reasons and legal reasons to be a Zionist, so help us with that.
Well, I think one of the things we're seeing today is even asking a question like that is a fallout in the local churches over a lack of understanding. First, biblically, because this is a biblical background for this. It's not just a political one or a social one, or even simply Zionism is anyone who believes that Zion is the homeland of the Jewish people. And Zion is a term that originated originally in the Bible as a place where David began his kingdom there in Jerusalem. It grew by extension to a place to the northern part of the city with the Temple Mount, and beyond that to the northern part of the city, and then became kind of a figurative term for all of Israel, with the idea that Jerusalem is the central focus of everything that is considered Israeli, everything in the Bible. The goals that fulfill their destiny and history all conclude in Jerusalem. So Zion is the place where all Jewish people around the world had an ambition to return, because ultimately that's the place where God will fulfill his call in their lives. And so if you are someone who believes that the homeland of the Jewish people is Zion, you're a Zionist. You could be a political Zionist, you could be a biblical Zionist, you could be a Christian Zionist, but that's the correct term to use for that belief.
So you hold to that position from God's word. We could go back to the Abrahamic covenant, and you hold to that position legally from the legal world. In other words, the Jews have a biblical and a legal right to be there, so they're not occupying anything. You can't occupy something that's yours.
No, I mean, from the biblical perspective back in Genesis, the land was being prepared for a people. Mm-hmm. And God had a plan for that people, and then he had a purpose to carry out, to demonstrate to the whole world his power and his purpose, and particularly the way he thinks, that is, what you see reflected in the law about a holy and righteous God who is sovereign in control of his world and has a chosen people for a chosen place. And so from the very beginning, this was communicated that this would happen eventually after the time of Abraham. They said 400 years when the iniquity of the Amorites was full, mm-hmm. Which is a term for all of the Canaanite peoples. When their iniquity had been full, giving them moral responsibility and accountability for being displaced, in other words, judged by the moral governor of the universe. We have this statement, does not the judge of all the earth do right? Mm-hmm. So he is doing this, and he does it with the people who are not necessarily that much better, mm-hmm. But they do with Abraham coming out of a pagan Mesopotamian context, a Gentile context, but he chooses Abraham, and Abraham responds, and as a result, he makes promises unconditionally to Abraham that he will give him that land, and not only him, but his descendants after him forever. And that is the basis by which we can accept that the Jewish people who have their source in Abraham as their titular head, you might say, something like this, would have their claim, not because they deserve it, not because they're better than anyone else, not because they're more than anyone else. The scripture later in Deuteronomy says that. It was because God chose them for that purpose.
Okay. So this issue of Zionism has become a real point of contention. Here's something that was floating around social media I wanted to share. It says Israel doesn't occupy the land, they own it. Genesis 15, verses 18 through 21. Well, let's go to number 2 here on our list. And the question is, are the Jews living in the land of Israel today the same as the Jews of the Bible? And the reason I'm asking that is you notice this particular tweet here from Stu Peters. He's tweeting or retweeting somebody else who said, thus the country of Israel today is not to be confused with and has no connection to the word Israel of the Bible. So there's a lot of people out there saying the Jews living in the land today is different than the Jews living in the Jews described in Scripture. And of course, there's a converse to that. Who are the Palestinians, and what is their claim to the land?
Okay. Well, first, these objections are political and theological. They're political because there's someone who favors a political people and simply wants to accept their claim over those of others. But from a religious or theological point of view, we have what's called replacement theology. And that's a viewpoint that says that because the Jewish people failed to keep the law, failed to receive their Messiah, God judged them, and he has replaced them with a better people, people not of the flesh but of the Spirit, that's the church that has taken the place of Israel. That was always God's plan from the beginning, that there was a remnant within Israel. It was really the church, and they have now come to... So this Israel of the past was rejected by God. It was a fossil civilization that would never fulfill its purpose. And so they moved on with the church, not having an ethnicity, but simply having a claim under the new covenant to being the people of God, together the people of God, whether Jew or Gentile. Therefore, some churches like the Presbyterian Church USA and others have said go back to the hymn books where we actually use the term Israel and take that out, because that would confuse people into thinking that the Jews of today may be related to those Jews of the past, and therefore give them some biblical warrant for having the land or being the people of God. Let me just frankly say, I'll give you my conclusion up front. The Jewish people connection to the land from ancient times is unique, it's unbroken, and it's consistent. When we look at the claims people have used in the past, they often brought up the Khazar myth. This is basically a multi-ethnic conglomerate of people, Turkic people, primarily from the Caucasus, that somewhere in the past were said to have converted en masse to Judaism. First, that's not anything new. We've had claims from tribes in India or in Ethiopia or in China or other places that are considered lost tribes that make those claims today. So the Khazars were not unique. But there really is no historical, serious work done to legitimize them as having a connection in the sense that the Jews of today trace their descent, European Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, to the Khazars. What we do have, however, historically and factually, and this is probably the only point I need to make, but I'll make some more, is that there is an unbroken succession of Jewish communities in Israel since the time of the Second Temple period. That was when we date the time of the Roman destruction of Jerusalem and a large expulsion of Jewish people in another exile. People tend to say, well, that was the end of things. No, there were Jewish communities that continued in the land. Places like Jerusalem, Hebron, Tiberias, other places could not be abandoned. These were holy cities. They felt duty bound. We know that's the case because not even 100 years later, you had a second Jewish revolt that defeated the Romans for a period of 3 years called the Bar Kokhba revolt. So you have enough Jews in the land to overcome them. We have historical accounts, though, from that time on that the people living in these communities had conversations or had all kinds of correspondence with the Jews in the diaspora, that is, Jews living outside the land. We have copies of that written correspondence. We have Jews from outside the land going to join Jews inside the land. We have in the time of someone like the Emperor Julian. Was it Julian the Apostate? Be sure I get the name right. In the 4th century, he is giving Jews the opportunity to rebuild the temple, which didn't happen because of an explosion and other issues, but you had Jews returning to the land to join these Jewish communities. That's all there. But we have this going on. That type of thing simply says, look, Jews were always there. They never left. So they are simply the descendants of the Jews that had always been there. Then you had communities in Egypt and communities in, let's say, Persia, things like this. But we also can look and we can see throughout the world clear linguistic and cultural a line of transition, which is completely unique among all the Jewish communities in the world. I mean, they're sitting here, they have their synagogues all face toward the east. They all have the same prayer books. They generally do the same prayers. And many other things like this, the customs, the cultures. When you talk about an unbroken 3,500 year tradition of the Passover. At the end of it, they always say, Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. It's a big deal. And they all are united in that. We have these, let's put it this way, in modern times, we have the science of genetics. And you have these different Jewish communities all around the world sharing the same common DNA. You have something called autosomal DNA, which it looks at the entire DNA mixture. And when you do that, you find that these people have specific traits on a genetic level that unite them, wherever they may be. They've done specific tests also with the priestly line, those who claim to be members of the Kohanim or Leviim. And they find that, they have an aberration of the Y chromosome. And when they look at this, it's both in the Ashkenazi, the European Jews, the Sephardi, the Middle Eastern Jews, and we know that split happened far back in the past. So if it's there, it must be before that time. That takes you all the way back, really, if we think of it, to the original progenitor of Aaron, the high priest. So you have, on a genetic level, this kind of evidence, that linkage that goes there. We have another thing. Archaeologically, you look at discoveries made in the land of Israel from the First Temple period to the Second Temple period, and you see Hebrew. You see Paleo-Hebrew in the First Temple period. You see the Hebrew that's used today in the Second Temple period. For instance, the Dead Sea Scrolls, all written in Hebrew. All of this is a language of the Jewish people. When we move forward 1,000 years to the Bible being put together, what we call the Masoretic text, it's made up of those Jewish Hebrew texts that were passed along, through the Jewish community from the ancient days, back before in the Second Temple period. And that, on an archaeological point of view, tells us the only people that ever used Hebrew were the Jewish people. You don't see Hebrew used anywhere else. You don't see records left like this. You don't see productions of the Bible made by other people. You see people making translations, but you don't see them handling Hebrew that way. And then we have the whole idea of Jerusalem. It's at the center of the hope of the Jewish people as far back as you can record it. When they have their weddings, they smash a goblet to indicate the destruction of the temple, commemorating that. When they bury Jews anywhere in the world, they have to have a little bit of the dust of Jerusalem to put into the coffin. That's required. When Jews pray 3 times a day, they face toward Jerusalem. This is their goal. You don't see this in any other people. For instance, in the Quran, Jerusalem's not even mentioned, not even once. So this is something that is unique to the Jewish people. It's time-tested. It's genetic. There's just no really serious doubt that the people we call the Jewish people today are the Jewish people from time immemorial.
Yeah, very good. All right, well, let's go here to number 3. And it has to do with oppression. Who is oppressing who exactly? And here's something from your PowerPoint that you gave at the pre-trib study group. And you're posing this just as a hypothetical. And this is...
Well, it's what's said today.
Yeah, these are the kinds of things people hear. The Palestinians have lived under Israeli occupation for 75 years. The Zionist occupiers stole their land and have kept the people of Gaza in poverty and prevented them from developing their city and lives. The Zionists have the power. I saw Cornel West, by the way, on Fox News, saying this as a guest on Fox News, using this argument. The Zionists have the power as they control the water and the electricity. When the people are deprived of freedom and oppressed every day, they have no choice but resistance, which is justified because of their victimization. So what, I guess the mindset is what happened in Gaza is related to Hamas coming into Israel. Terrorism, October the 7th, is justified because after all, Israel is oppressing Gaza. What say you?
Well, let me parse what I put there. Palestinians live in Israeli occupation for 75 years. 75 years is the time of the existence of the modern state of Israel. There were no Palestinians when the state of Israel began, as we think of them today. In other words, when you talked about before the state of Israel, you had Palestinian Jews and Palestinian Arabs, because anyone who lived in the place called Palestine took that identity. The Arabs, of course, claimed identity not as Palestinians, but with either their local tribe, or whether it was Bedouin or something like this, or their ethnicity. They were either Egyptians, or they were from, let's say, Jordan, but it's probably a little after Jordan, but or from primarily Lebanon, or from somewhere like Syria. Those are the primary. There's about 100 different ethnicities that have been documented of the Arabs who came in to work under Jews returning to the land before the state of Israel was created. And there was actually some sense of invitation by the local Arabs for more Jews to come in because they were improving conditions. They created types of hospitals and things which allowed more infant survival, or they paid better wages than other countries, and particularly under the prior Turkish administration that ended in 1918. But so there were, what we call a Palestine today did not exist in 1948. Now, when you talk, so there was no occupation by these people. In fact, if you look at the two-state solution that was proposed in 1947 by the UN, the majority of the land, the livable land, arable land, was going to the Arabs who lived in the land, and then the Jewish people were going to have a small area, not even all of Jerusalem, but part of the land. They were given the Negev area, which was basically uninhabitable. You often see these maps that people put up of the shrinking land of the Palestinians. Well, it's a false picture, because the Palestinians didn't live in those lands either. They didn't own after 1948. When you talk before 1948, they didn't, and after 48, they didn't, because we talk about the West Bank, Jordan had that. You talk about the Golan Heights, Syria had that. You talk about over on the coastal plain. That whole area was occupied by Egypt. So, what was left? Well, the area that Israel had, and those Arabs who continued to live within what was now the state of Israel were no longer considered Palestinian Arabs, and now they're called Israeli Arabs. Today they just call themselves Palestinians, but that's because Palestinianism became a national movement with Yasser Arafat and some of these others to try to force the Jews out of the country because of the larger picture of the Arab world, particularly the Islamic world, that wanted to unite, and the state of Israel was in its way. When you talk about they stole the land, kept the people of Gaza, the facts are that Egypt had Gaza under their control until 1967. From 67 till 2005, it was under Israeli control. And what did the Israelis do? They improved conditions. They built synagogues, yes, but they built hotels. It was really like a thriving, beginning to be a new oasis right there on the coast. And Gazans, if you put that, lived there with them. These were the Arab population that was there. They were not mistreated. They did well. There were not problems. But then, because Ariel Sharon was the prime minister and was concerned over these negotiations of land for peace, that the Arabs in the negotiations were demanding the city of Jerusalem. And that was something they just could not compromise on. So he offered instead Gaza. So that was accepted. The Israelis withdrew from Gaza. It went completely under the control of the Arab or Palestinian leadership at the time, which was Fatah, Yasser Arafat's group, under a man named Mahmoud Abbas, who succeeded Yasser Arafat. And so from that time until this time, it's been completely under their own independent control. Now, they didn't try to improve the infrastructure. They didn't try to do anything else. They left the people in poverty. And the result was that the Israelis, on a humanitarian basis, continued to give them electricity and provide them with water, all of these things. And that was simply done because they needed it, all right, even though they had completely withdrawn. So Gaza was autonomous at this point. So that is impossible to say that Israel prevented them from developing their cities and lives. We know now, if you look at the evidence that's come from just the war, 500 miles of terror networks the whole time. They were building these things from Egypt on, underground, completely into the city, putting them under hospitals, putting them under schools, putting them under other places where the civilian population was, hiding weapons within these structures. All of this is what we know. So how could Israel oppress a people that had independence? That they were when they were autonomous. It's not the case. If that's, you could say, well, they're oppressing them because of the greater occupation of the land. Again, what occupation? There was no war fought with the Palestinians. You can look at every war that Israel fought from 48 to 56 to 67 to 73. Not one of the UN declarations concerning what is going to happen with the land or boundaries or things involve Palestinians. They're not mentioned in any of those legal documents. So the borders that were drawn up with Jordan. Okay, so we talk about the West Bank. It's the West Bank of Jordan, not the West Bank of Israel. And the same thing with the Gaza Strip, and the same thing with the Golan Heights with the Syrians. So it's not been an occupation. As you know, any war that happened, someone took land and occupied it. So the land of Israel was occupied by Egyptians, occupied by Jordanians, or occupied by Syrians, if we think in the biblical sense of what is Judea and Samaria.
Okay, well, very good. Well, let's go here to our next question, and this has to do with Hamas. What is the true agenda of Hamas? Coexistence with Israel or eradication of Israel? Let me just cycle through a few slides here if I could do that. Here they are marching with annihilationist language. The sign says Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. Of course, the river would be the Jordan and the sea would be the Mediterranean, meaning they don't want a Jewish presence.
And a lot of people who give these chants don't know what river they're talking about.
Yes.
And really don't care.
Yes.
The idea is, we talk about genocidal language. This is it.
Yeah.
If the Israelis exist between those 2 points and you want to remove them from that so that you can occupy that and make it free, of course, we first assume there is occupation oppression, which is not true. But to do this would then result in occupation oppression.
Right.
So you just have to choose which. But Hamas is a organization that has a charter. And in their charter, they clearly state that their charter is the elimination of the state of Israel. Okay, you can see this covenant they made up. It says...
if we can put up Hamas covenant 1988.
Right, so...
Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it and other such language.
So this is not a national movement, nor is it a political movement. It's a religious movement. Its basis is Islam. It carries out holy war, or jihad. Its idea is not to have coexistence, not to have a two-state solution, not to have any kind of reconciliation, but to eliminate Jews. We can talk a little later about why they think that way, but they have dehumanized Jews. They don't think of them as human beings. They accept statements in the Quran and the Hadith that basically will say that Jews have no right to exist as people, that when they are attacked and you're to slaughter them like you do animals, all these type of things. And here, this is Article 15.
Hamas Charter Article 15, if you could put that
It says it clear, the Palestinian problem is a religious problem, should be dealt with on that basis, which means you can't sit here and have people in Qatar or have people in the United States or Egyptians or others sit down in closed rooms and negotiate or have diplomats come up with solutions. Because for Hamas, none of that is acceptable. The United States is as much a Satan as Israel is a Satan, based on Iran. Iran's statement was that got the little Satan and the great Satan. They are a proxy or a construct of Iran. They're sponsored and backed by Iran, as is Hezbollah, as is Islamic Jihad, as are the Houthis down in Yemen. So all these different so-called resistance groups are actually like ISIS. Their intent is to follow the Quran in a literal way and apply its edicts, which means that Islam must rule the world and everyone must be Islamic or be a second-class citizen under the dictates of Islam, under Sharia law. And this is their goal.
Yeah, so this coexistence concept isn't accurate. Well, this logically leads to number 5. And I think this is the part of it that has, since October 7th, surprised the Western mind. I mean, it surprised me. And it has to do with the brutality. We have examples of decapitations
Of babies.
of Jewish babies, Jewish babies put in ovens. So my question is, how do you account for the brutality of Hamas towards Israel as represented in the events of October 7th, 2023? Just a couple of things here. If we can put up, Allah turned the Jews into apes and pigs. That's an actual statement from the Quran. Here's another statement from the Quran about beheadings and desecrations. And here's a horrifying phone call. We actually covered this on our show, but there in the left-hand corner, it's a phone conversation between a son who's a Hamas terrorist and the father who was released, and the son is all excited on this telephone call saying, "Father, I killed 10 Jews with my own hand. See on WhatsApp. I filmed everything," close quote. In the background, you can hear the Israelis pleading for their lives while telling his parents what he's done with pride. So this is the level of butchery that's shocking. So how do you explain that?
It also shows you the moral equivalency in that cartoon.
Yes.
Whereas on the one hand, they celebrate death and murder. On the other hand, they celebrate life and deliverance. So, okay, this is the problem for people in the West. We just do not imagine that anyone would stoop to these levels, and that's why there have been so many who've claimed this is all fabricated, that it can't be true, it isn't true. This is simply some type of propaganda from the Israeli side. No one would do this because we believe that everybody is freedom-loving, that everybody has compassion, that everybody really wants to get along. And if you just give people the chance, they will embrace that. That is an alien concept in the Middle East. It's just the opposite of the truth. People do not live under democracy. They do not want to live under democracy. They do not have a natural compassion, maybe for their own children, but maybe not when you talk about the children serving a greater or higher end to the religious cause. And they certainly don't have a sense in which they need to get along because their goal is that these people are oppressors or these people are the kafir, the unbelievers. These are the people that need to be eliminated, either brought under Islam as a convert or destroyed. There's only two choices: the world of Islam or the world of the sword. So this is the way they're brought up. But beyond that, the normal person cannot go out and commit atrocities like this unless they are indoctrinated from a very early age. And we have Memory. This is an organization that records, films everything coming out of the Arab and Muslim world, and has translations and some explanation about it. You can go online, you can see everything that's said. When Nasrallah gives a speech up in Lebanon, you can see his actual words in the translation of it, not what you're reported in bits and pieces. So the facts are these. You have children from the earliest ages, from birth, taught in books, taught in their homes by parents, taught that the Jews were not human beings. They were turned into apes and pigs in the past. Now they're the descendants of those things that Allah cursed and turned into apes and pigs. So genetically, they're not human beings. They may look like it, but they're not. And then, on another level, you hear about the Jews being cursed in various ways, and the punishment for them is to cut off their heads or cut off their hands and feet. That was a direct statement by Muhammad, supposedly from Allah. So this is the way they're treated. When Muhammad conquered a Jewish tribe, about 900 people, called the Beni Israel, they lived next to, in Mecca, next to his tribe. He conquered them, and he himself personally beheaded all of the men of the tribe and then took the women and raped them. And this was the way he showed things were to be done. So this is why, but from an early age, you also have training camps all throughout Gaza, for instance. UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Organization, Works Relief, allowed this to happen, allowed these education camps. So kids would go straight from school, straight to these education camps, be taught how to use weapons, taught how to kill Jews. And so just as you cut the throat of an animal, you cut the throat of a Jew, behead them. So all this is part of early indoctrination. So there's a desensitivity to this. You don't think of them as human beings. On the other hand, there is the Islamic positive side that you're in holy war. There's reward for being a jihadist. You are doing these things for Allah. Your whole family rejoices. Your family will be rewarded. Wow. If you die in this, you go to paradise and get virgins. It's a wonderful life. So everything you're doing is the right thing. And your parents often say, I wish I had 10 sons to give as martyrs. Wow. So because of all of this, these kids could go in, they could commit these horrible acts, but they're based on their religious text in the Quran and other places. And then they would turn around and brag about this because that only gives honor to their community. Mm-hmm. Now we might say, this is terrible. But do you realize this has all been published now. It's all been out there. And not only do you have solidarity in Gaza, for the most part, with Hamas, but you have it around the world. You have it, for instance, Fatah, who was the ruling leadership in Gaza when the Israelis withdrew, were overtaken by Hamas. There was a democratic so-called election. Hamas won. They started taking the leaders of Fatah and throwing them off of buildings, and they fled to Ramallah. And so they have been enemies of each other up to this point. But when you talk about what Fatah says, they embrace and support and endorse what happened on October 7th. All of the atrocities are there. Wow. And not only them, throughout the Muslim world, you haven't seen anyone denounce these types of acts. Yeah. So, yes, it's hard to understand, but it happened, and that's the depth of human depravity.
Mm-hmm. So it's almost like religious texts allowing depravity to do what it already wants to do. That might be one way of saying it.
Yeah, I think it's important, Andy, when we talk about this, talk about the moral equivalence and other things too. All of us are fundamentalist in one sense. If we take the fundamental doctrines of our faith. So I'm a fundamentalist if I believe the Bible is true and I follow it word for word. They are Muslims and they are fundamentalists because they follow the Quran. But the worldview is totally opposite. And Hamas will say, we love death like you love life.
Wow.
And we talk about, don't you care about your children being, caught up in this? Not at all. Our children serve the greater end. And when you kill our children, it just lets the world see how bad you are.
Wow.
This type of thing.
All right, well, let's go here to number 6, and we've already alluded to this. Is it possible to draw moral equivalence between Hamas's brutal attack on Israel, October the 7th, 2023, and the Israeli occupation? Let me set this up just a little bit. The reason I'm asking this is our former president, Barack Obama, came out and gave a statement. And he said something to the effect of, yes, what Hamas did was wrong, but the occupation is unbearable. And so you get this, if you hear that enough in the news, you get the idea that, well, Hamas was wrong, but, Israel kind of brought it on themselves. And, you sit over here, Billy, and be good, and you sit over here, Johnny, and be good. And there's like equal culpability on both sides. And yet that's not true. Israel, as you're going to explain to us, I think, fights in a way that no other country fights. If we can put up the Israeli military dropping of the leaflets, here's something from your slides. It says, Israeli military drops thousands of leaflets over Gaza, telling civilians to evacuate. So obviously Israel is doing things morally that the other side is not doing. So help us work through this moral
more than
equivalence
that, they provided
argument.
a corridor for escape for those who wanted to. At the same time, you had clear statements by the leadership of Hamas: do not leave, stay where you are. Okay? They knew the buildings would be bombed. They knew Israel would attack these places. Israel said leave, Hamas said stay. Now, that shows you one thing. We often have the statement made that one man's terrorist and another man's freedom fighter.
Yeah.
So they're all fighting for freedom, and you call them terrorists, but they're simply fighting for freedom. No, they're not. They're not fighting for freedom because this is a concept unknown to them. They don't want freedom. They want under Sharia law. There's no free thought, no freedom in the sense that we have in our Constitution. What they are fighting for is Islam, and so they don't really care what happens to their people as long as they can affect the rest of the people. Israel says, look, everybody matters. Everybody, when we have someone injured in war, we treat them in our hospitals, whether they're Israelis or whether they're Arabs. Doesn't really matter. We treat them all the same. We go in and try to help people. One of the problems, we had Israelis killed already in this war because they had children up there, and they had women sitting there, and they went to help them, and the women pulled out guns and shot them.
Wow.
And the kids were sitting on bombs. I mean, this is the way they approach things. So you can't have moral equivalency if you don't have morals in that sense. All right, there's nothing to work from.
Yeah, great. All right, now let's get. This has already been alluded to. Let me cycle through a few of your slides, but here's the question. Let me say a couple things first. Why is the tension in the Middle East involving Israel really a religious issue? And here's a quote from Ibn Warwick, if I'm pronouncing that right, former Why I'm Not a Muslim, former Muslim. He says, there may be moderate Muslims, but Islam itself is not moderate. There is no difference between Islam and Islamic fundamentalism. At most, there is a difference of decree, but not kind. Here's another slide that you use showing that these attacks are symbolic because they take place on specific times of the calendar germane to Islam's history. Here's another slide where Hamas co-founder says Jewish prayers. See, this is all religious language. Jewish prayers are a blatant attack on the religious and Islamic status of the city and the mosque. And here is Erdogan, the current Prime Minister of Turkey, saying each day that Jerusalem is under occupation is an insult to us. In other words, what all these slides communicate is you can't get to the root of this tension unless you understand the religious conflict.
Yeah, you may find a slide in there somewhere about the deluge. That's what Hamas called the attack from October 7 and gave it a reason. Mm-hmm. That is the liberation of Jerusalem. So it's all religious. In other words, they could care less about the oppression of their population. They're more concerned about the liberation of Jerusalem 50 miles away, because the Islamic goal is that once any place has come under the control of Islam, it must remain so in perpetuity. Mm-hmm. And now Jerusalem is under control of Israelis, even though Israelis, in an act of clemency, gave all of the Temple Mount, which was the ancient part of Jerusalem, with the site of their own temple, to which they pray, they gave that to the control of the Muslims. And it's been a continual problem ever since. But they did that to their own hurt because they were concerned about the international attitude. They were concerned about religious equality, or at least giving people in their midst some sense of freedom and democracy. They respect that. It's not so on the other side. So, but it's their own statements say this is a religious war. It's nothing else. You look at this not just on Hamas, and they call the whole conflict a religious one, but look, as we said, Turkey. Mm-hmm. You can see this in other countries too, mm-hmm. where they see Jerusalem and other places that have the religious focus as what has to be liberated. You had Saddam Hussein saying that when he was in Iraq. Mm-hmm. You've seen the Iranians say this. You even had in 9/11, if you remember that, when we had that attack, the statement was made by Osama bin Laden then, mm-hmm. that this is for the liberation of the Palestinians, or something under Islam. Had nothing to do with the United States. It had to do with other religious causes over here.
So that's a mindset that's, in other words, this is not the art of the deal. This is not a hotel real estate deal. I think a lot of our leadership in our country kind of goes over there and thinks they can just kind of work it out like they would work out a hotel, building a hotel or something. But this is a deep-seated religious conflict, and you can't even understand it until you understand these two competing religious worldviews. If you haven't lived in the Middle East and haven't lived in an Islamic context, you really can't. Yeah. Just like people who haven't lived in an Oriental context don't understand, the Chinese or Japanese or someone's idea of saving face mm-hmm. is more important than anything that could happen to their family. Mm-hmm. Okay, you have throughout the Muslim world, no matter what country it is, if there is a violation, for instance, a member of your family, a daughter, mm-hmm. moves to the United States, goes to a American university, takes off her head covering, puts on makeup, puts on jeans. She's worthy of death. Wow. And they will send members of their own family over to execute her. Mm-hmm. This is done across the board. When you have people talking about gay rights or trans rights or something like this and linking it to the liberation of Palestine. In other words, one liberation is good for another. Mm-hmm. Not so. Throughout the Muslim world, if you are something other than simply what the Quran dictates, man and woman and marriage and all, you are executed. Mm-hmm. You are hung publicly, or thrown off of bridges. I mean, this goes on today. Mm-hmm.
You do not have this in these countries.
No.
So our country can't imagine that because it's become so woke and progressive and all that it does. It can't understand that anyone else cannot think that way.
All right,
They don't.
let's try to squeeze one more in here. Number 8, and this is something, Dr. Price, that's sort of been, what's the expression, stuck in my craw for for a while. I'm hearing this from people that I generally agree with on most things, and they're floating this idea that somehow Netanyahu did this intentionally. They talk about the power of the Israeli defenses, and there's no way this could have happened unless this was an inside job. We have 9/11 people that argue the same thing relative to our own country. But the question is, did Netanyahu issue a stand-down order in the events surrounding October 7th, 2023, in order to intentionally create a crisis to consolidate power over Gaza? Here's Charlie Kirk, a pretty good conservative guy on most things, but the Washington Times picks him up as saying, defaming Israel, Charlie Kirk floats theory Netanyahu let Hamas slaughter Jews to consolidate power. And a lot of these guys just want to float the theory. After all, Israel had 19 northern kings and they were all evil, and she had 20 southern kings and only 8 of them were good. And so they give you this impression that somehow Netanyahu is in on it, and he's part of the Illuminati, and their conspiracy theories go wild. The reason it bothers me is there's already an acrimonious atmosphere towards Israel, and I think this kind of thing contributes to it. But can you shed light on this kind of thing?
Well, the reason this has currency is because, first off, people have looked at the situation before October 7th, saw that Netanyahu took a stance on judicial reform that others did not. The country was being divided. There were people having massive protest about this. We talk about a unity government, but there was anything but that. So the nation was in a serious possibility of a civil war. I mean, this was there. So people see that and say, must have tried to do something to get the pressure off of him. Certainly this whole event has reunified the nation. There's a solidarity. There is a renewed morale. You see people singing at the Western Wall, Am Israel High, the people of Israel live. You see, all of this has come about. So they say, this makes sense to me. On the other hand, they say, look, Israelis are the most sophisticated we know with their equipment. They spent billions on the security fence. They had all of this. They were warned ahead of time. They knew that this was the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, where the same thing happened, a surprise attack, many other types of things. So there's just no way that this could have happened by chance. They got caught off guard. That's not Israel. They don't get caught off guard. So naturally, with that kind of thinking, you're looking for some type of a conspiratorial view, especially when you have a larger view that we have Jews involved with elitist, globalist organizations, that they are trying to do nefarious things. And you might as well say, this must go across the board. Now, on the other hand, if you have lived in Israel like I have, you know the Israeli people, you know the history related to the Holocaust, you know that someone like Netanyahu, his father was a grand historian, a Bible believer, not necessarily a believer in Christ, but a Bible believer. Right. He wrote a major book on the Inquisition, which detailed the whole history of Jewish persecution under other people and their response to it. Netanyahu's own family came out of the Holocaust. His brother was killed in the raid on Entebbe by Palestinians. Okay. At the same time, he is a Bible believer in the sense that he has weekly Bible studies, Talmud studies that's done. One of his younger sons won the award for the whole country in memorizing biblical verses and things like this. He's always held a conservative, high moral position, and so to somehow say that all of that is jettisoned and he is now behind the people that want to destroy the country he's been trying throughout his life to keep as a refuge for Jewish people, to defend against this type of thing, it is very hard to believe. The whole Jewish mindset, Israel exists to prevent this, to be a refuge for people, to safeguard that. But then you have to realize that this happened at a time, this whole thing had been planned and staged for over a year. You had the Chinese, you had certainly Iran and others all working with surveillance, taking down through cyber terrorism, diffusing the fence, allowing people to go through at different places that invade the country. You had all of this working. You had, at the same time, the end of the high holidays, which is like our Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, everything rolled into one with the whole country absorbing it. Okay, everything is shut down, everything is closed, and then also happened to be a Sabbath, the last day of this religious month, and then a Sabbath day as well. So military people are not mobilized; they're out with their families, they're doing things. If there was, this is what someone like Golda Meir faced. She heard ahead of time there could be an attack. She just said, they talk about this all the time. This is the things they threaten constantly. This is just political posturing, or this is simply their religious talk. You know, we're going to throw you into the sea. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And these dates are symbolic, yes, but there was no reason just on that basis to bring all of our guys home, mobilize the whole army, do all these things. It's the holiest time of the year. Yeah. She was wrong. And she, lost her position because of that as well. Could this be the same thing happen here?
So just negligence rather than conspiratorial.
Could be.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know. The fact is that Israel denies what these others are saying, but it says that they'll do a full investigation when the time is right. They're fighting a war right now. The truth will come out to some degree.
Yeah.
We don't know the truth about so many events in our own country. Sure. So let's not
jump to
conclusions and vilify Israel on the basis of this.
Yeah, good. Well, the reason, folks, that we're going through this material is these are the things people are talking about. The Middle East plays a major role in God's end-time program. Christians particularly have a lot of interest and concern about these things, and so we think it's incumbent upon the Church of Jesus Christ not to shed more heat into these kinds of things, but to shed more light and more information from reputable sources like Dr. Price helps us to do that, to be able to sort fact from fiction. And so we're going to come back, Lord willing, in part 2 and try to answer our remaining questions related to how does this affect the West? Because we have a tendency to think that's just stuff in the Middle East, doesn't affect the United States at all. Well, think again, and beyond that, we're going to talk about, is there any hope in the midst of these things as we analyze them prophetically? So thank you, Dr. Price, for joining us in part 1, and we're looking forward to part 2. God bless you. Thank you for watching.